Greetings and salutations. This is Abdelhadi with The Bitter Truth, where we may not have all the answers, but we're going to ask an awful lot of questions. You can also become a bitter pill or a spoonful of sugar, etc. by visiting thebittertruth.info. And there we've got some fabulous merch that you can get, or you can also subscribe to the Patreon link and get the same merch and just not pay individually for it. And whatever you want to do. The show is always available for free on Spotify, iTunes, Podcast Addict, YouTube, and all the rest for the foreseeable future. Who knows what's going to happen after the Capitol brouhaha, President Crime Bill, otherwise known as Blue Jesus, otherwise known as Joe Biden, wants to do another revision of the Patriot Act because there's not enough laws on the books to prosecute the assholes at the Capitol fracas. But hey, let's make up some more laws so that we could surveil Americans and then deplatform people that they don't like, that say things against bombing black and brown people and stealing their shit for free. But I digress already, and I'm just getting started. Today, I wanted to kind of revisit an idea that incidentally was brought up by Andrew Yang when he was running for president. And sadly, it was his one thing that ended up creating the Yang Gang, and got a lot of excitement and buzz around him because he seemed like a pretty reasonable guy and kind of a quasi-progressive libertarian dude running as a Democratic candidate for president. And he was talking about a basic income, or a BI, which was originally way back in the day a Thomas Jefferson idea called a Freedom Dividend. And that was something Thomas Jefferson wanted to do after all the brand new country had an awful lot of free stuff at its disposal, including slave labor and free product and land stolen from Indians. So Thomas Jefferson thought, hey, we should give our citizens sort of like a dividend, for participating in the Revolutionary War and, paying taxes and blah, 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 blah. And George Washington and the rest of those motherfuckers decided to kibosh the idea because the word socialism wasn't invented yet, but they're kind of going, are you kidding? We can't give people money because then we won't have as much. The 0.2% it'll cost me. Because as I mentioned earlier, it was a government thing. They weren't going to George Washington and asking him for a loan. Anyway, Andrew Yang did it. And then we all kind of know what happened. He kind of, petered out a little bit and was gone out of the primary. And then he got a big fat CNN contract and back to Joe Biden. So that was the final nail in that coffin. Sadly, his great point disappeared into the stew of his junk culture, or not his junk culture, but junk culture. That's what we have these days. Junk culture, junk politics, junk history. We don't read anything, watch anything. You say something remotely like it sounds like you got it out of a book, and people look at you like you're doing card tricks in front of a dog, to quote Bill Hicks. And they act like you're some sort of big-time intellectual. And what's really scary is if anyone is threatened by me and thinks that I'm an intellectual, they really need to get out more. I was on academic probation in college 3 times. It was a small miracle that I graduated. In fact, it was such a small miracle that I got a letter from the Pope saying that if I could do 3 card tricks, he might grant me a sainthood, because me getting out of college was, pretty small miracle level shit. But anyway, back to what I was talking about, the Jefferson idea, I think means more now than ever, since American investment by the taxpayer has been incredibly large over the last 90 to 100 years. And before I jump into some of these numbers and some of these examples, I'll give you a quick math here from the near college dropout who didn't drop out. Just to tell you what $1 trillion is, $1 trillion. We hear that word all the time, and I think we're so anesthetized to it. Like we're just so numb to $1 trillion. It's like million, billion, trillion. Okay, well, I guess I can get $1 trillion if I really needed it. If you were born on the same day as Jesus, that Jesus, and I paid you $43 million every month until this past Christmas time, 2020, that's $1 trillion. So as an example, since the 1930s, the United States government has invested over $1 trillion into Big Pharma, okay, for their research and development. And we all know what Big Pharma in the United States does. They turn right around and they sell us shit that costs about 50 cents to make, that they could make an incredible profit on selling it for $20, and then they turn around and sell it for $700, and many people die because they parcel out the medication or whatever it is, and which is just as bad as not having it, and then they die anyway. So, or they're maltreated and end up with some permanent conditions. But by and large, $1 trillion for one industry, paid for by the United States taxpayer. I'm not going to say the government probably for the rest of this show. I'm just going to say the taxpayer, because that's you and me. I think the right wing and some libertarians love to go on and say, the government. Oh, what do you want, handouts from the government? No, asshole. I would like my taxpayer dollar to be stretched further and do nice things instead of bombing all the countries we're bombing and, setting aside $30 million for another coup attempt in Venezuela in 2021. And I can guarantee you Joe Biden is not going to put the kibosh on that plan, because that's right up his fucking alley. Instead of spending that kind of money to do that kind of thing, we could spend it here. Like, for example, I don't have children, at least none that I know of, knock wood. But I have no problem with, 0.2 of 1 percentage point of my taxes, providing daycare. So a family or a single mom doesn't have to pay $20,000 a year to put her kid in daycare until kindergarten. So she can go to work, right? And that's more quality of life. That's another $2,000 a month, $1,500, whatever it is coming in. All of a sudden now she's got rent covered, right? And maybe she can, put some money into the economy and buy things. God forbid people actually buy things. I think we've all forgotten about the Pullman strikes, where it's a grand idea to just raise prices on people, lower their wages so they can't afford to buy the shit that you put out. Oh, but that's okay, because then when your company fails, you can go to the government and get a bailout. So it's socialism for the capitalists, but capitalism for us, the society. So we basically privatize the gains, but socialize the losses. Again, $1 trillion since the 1930s for Big Pharma. The internet, famously derided by Al Gore on accident when he said, "We invented the internet." He wasn't completely wrong. The Pentagon invented the internet, and that's who invented it, so that they could communicate better, so they could bomb more people. And then they went ahead and made it gave commercial access. So, they also not only invented the internet, but they maintain it. So while Verizon and all these guys, handle their towers, it's the government that maintains the internet. How do you think Parler got taken down last week within 2 days? Congress just said, "Fuck you, you can't be on the internet." And they were gone, wiped out in a day, which I'm not going to cry a river for Parler. We start getting into free speech issues when Twitter and Facebook and everybody else have no accountability for not only wrong news, but flat out fake ass news. Like they're just resuscitating the Russian bounty thing again and again with no evidence, no emails, no nothing, just to put it out there, just to try to make the Republicans look bad one more time. Like, they really need help. The Republicans have been shooting themselves in the dick every day for a long time. And I don't know if we need a Russian bounty thing, which is absolute bullshit, because, we're there fighting in Afghanistan. Afghanis are going to be shooting back at us. That's kind of what they do. And then they went to the Iranians. It's, the Iranians were paying a bounty. And then they went, oh, well, I guess nobody was paying a bounty. So I digress. But in addition to the internet, the Pentagon also invented GPS and touchscreen technology and voice recognition. So all the crap that is used for Siri and Alexis and the whole nine yards, everything that you're wired and dialed into is has been invented and paid for by the taxpayer, right? So that being said, Verizon, Apple, T-Mobile, Microsoft, Google, all the rest should be paying us a dividend. The pharma industry should be paying us a dividend. If you have a social security number in this country, you should be getting a monthly or quarterly check for your dividend into these industries. I'm going to go into some more, and then I'll start wrapping it up here. But look at the COVID vaccine alone. We gave $10 billion to Pfizer, Purdue, all of them, and and generally speaking, we're paying 40% of their R&D right now to come up with this COVID vaccine, right? And for us to go, it's going to be covered for a little bit, and then we got to go pay for it, right? I was just on the IRS website today trying to get a form, and they wouldn't let me get it unless I subscribed to this third-party service for $8 a month, and they gave me a 30-day free trial. So I downloaded the form, printed it, and canceled the trial because fuck you. I should not have to pay to download a form to give the IRS tax money. That's insanity. But we do that as consumers. We pay way blown up prices for everything to pay for their advertising budget to sell it to us, which is pure fucking lunacy. But we do it. But that being said, we can make up for that with this basic income crap that Andrew Yang tried to come up with, and nobody cares. But I want to try to resuscitate this thing. So taxes, big oil, they get deferments and subsidies. We subsidize them to the tune of 20 to 30 billion a year. We also subsidize Walmart to the tune of 30 billion a year, if you don't know that. And we do that by the fact that they don't pay their workers enough or give them enough hours. So if you ever want to do this, I saw a documentary called The High Cost of Low Prices or something like that about 10 years ago. And I've done this a couple of times where I was walking by the break room at a Walmart. And yes, I do go there sometimes because I am evil and I have made my deals with the devil as well, as we all do. And I've snuck into the break room, not too far. You walk down a short 3-foot hall and you stick your head in the door. And you could see on the bulletin board, there's signs for Medicaid. There's signs for housing assistance. There's signs how to get food stamps, all government posters for the workers so that the Walton family can hang on to their $80 billion a piece because they're all worth like $1 bazillion each, and not shell out a couple of bucks more to make sure that their employees have A, a living wage, and B, get around that 35-hour-a-week bullshit so they don't have to pay benefits, which is why we got to pay for Medicaid. So again, we should be getting a basic income based on that. Jefferson called it a freedom dividend. Andrew Yang calls it a basic income. You call it a UBI, whatever you want to call it. But we should be getting a dividend from all these companies every fucking month or quarter. Okay. The airlines this last, the first bailout in April, they got $50 billion. And I don't know why these things are done on a handshake. They never seem to come up with the idea of, no, let's put this in the bill that if you lay anyone off, we're going to put you in jail. Didn't do that. And this summer, they laid off 90,000 workers after they took $50 billion. And in this last package from a couple of weeks back, they got another $17 billion with the same handshake. So I guess I'm going to promise not to lay off more people. According to Forbes magazine, that left-wing rag Forbes, there's such a bunch of hippies over there. The Defense Department costs us $1.2 trillion a year. Now, what did I say $1 trillion was earlier? You're born on the same day as Jesus, 43 million a month for 2,020 years. That's $1 trillion. And we do that every year. And if you recall, summer of 18, the Defense Department, or the Pentagon rather, failed their first ever audit and cannot account for over $20 trillion over the last 25 years, which is fucking scary. They can't account for $25 trillion. I mean, you and I can account for it. We know but just eyeballing it, we can kind of guess where that went. But they can't seem to find the money. Oops. If any company failed an audit that miserably, employees would be arrested and put in jail. Not here. Not when it's the government. And while we're and with that 1.2 trillion, because you always hear the 740 billion, the 780 billion. The Forbes number also includes nukes, the VA, and covert operations. And we don't know about those because they're secret. That's why they're covert. So anyway, but that being said, we're on top of these forever wars for the last 20 years. And without any irony, I routinely hear people say things like, we need a more muscular response to China. Iran's getting out of control. Who told you that? TV? And have you not been paying attention to the last 20 fucking years that we've been lied into every single war? I mentioned earlier that we're spending $30 million this year to pull another coup in Venezuela, who, by the way, had an election in December. And Maduro won by a fuck ton this time. And the entire right-wing opposition party was voted out of office, including that little twerp, Juan Guaido, who's under investigation for $90 million that he can't seem to account for, that the U.S. government gave him. And so, again, when it comes to stuff like that, why can't we make peace with our enemies and deals with our friends? Venezuela has oil. Why do we have to insist on Standard Oil running their oil for them when they can run it perfectly themselves. And before anybody says, oh, well, they're not working out very well, are they? Well, if we had 200 sanctions imposed on us, we wouldn't be working out very well either. If you don't know what a sanction is, real quickly, it's when a country is not allowed to buy or sell to most of the free world because the U.S. says, if you buy from them, we will sanction you. And since the EU and the Nordic countries and everybody else doesn't want to deal with that, and Iran's got more sanctions than anybody, so they just opened a grocery store in Caracas 6 months ago, and I saw a little quick video on it. It looks great. It's a real grocery store pumped full of real groceries and inexpensive food for people to buy. And the problem with our country not liking the Maduro thing was because he nationalized their oil and he pays a living wage and he has affordable housing and free education and healthcare. And we don't necessarily not want him to do that, but we want their oil and just pay him like $500,000 a year and give him a Cadillac and tell him to go fuck himself. And then we want their oil. That's it. But when a country nationalizes their own resources and provides a better quality of life, it's not that we don't like it. We just don't like the result, which means we don't get the thing for free. And part of it too is we don't like it, right? Because we like to say that capitalism is good, because we treat capitalism as this immutable, entity like the Constitution. You can't, it's sacrosanct. No, it's not. A bunch of guys fucking wrote it. Capitalism, a bunch of guys invented it. And if you don't really know that you're not a bad person if you're not a capitalist, you need to seriously get your head out of Jesus's ass and start paying attention to what's going on, because 2 + 2 is always fucking 4. And we have been pumping money into this system, the taxpayer, for every 4 to 7 years for the last 120 plus. And more recently, lately, if you've been paying attention to the COVID crisis, we've been pumping $1 trillion a day into the banks and Wall Street. $1 trillion a day. Again, kids, what's $1 trillion? $43 million a month for 2,020 years. That's $1 trillion. And we've been giving those motherfuckers that every single day at zero interest. Zero interest. It's supposed to be a loan, but I don't know how you're going to pay that back. Do they? No. Suddenly, there's no issue with deficits when we talk about defense and bailouts. When we talk about a $600 check, we got to worry about the deficit. What about my children's future? Quit watching television. Swear to fucking God, there's a million things out there. And when people get pissed at me and they go, did you watch YouTube? What was the last book you read? That's my answer always. What was the last book you read? Again, I'm not a fucking genius. I go through 2 or 3 books a month, and most of it's on Audible, right? Because I used to read books on paper. I just read fiction now as a book because I like fiction in books. But I was going through a book a month, and I'm going through 3 or 4 books a month. Why? Because I can listen to Audible, stop and take notes. At the grocery store, I'm working out. I'm doing my thing. I go through a couple of hours a day just because it's easy to digest. I'm not having to sit and read 20 pages at a pop, and then I got to get to work because I actually have a day job. So like a lot of us, right? So I have to actually get things done. So that being said, so what is the big point? What is the big point in all of this? What it really is a dividend on investment, no different than with stock brokers sell their clients. You buy the stock, it's going to pay a dividend. Some stocks don't pay a dividend, right? You just wait for it to appreciate until you're comfortable with it and you sell it. But a lot of stocks will pay a dividend every quarter. But this is an investment by the taxpayer. So we should be paid for our investment. Okay, that's kind of the whole point of this. So when people tell you things like, socialism doesn't work, they always point to Venezuela. And I love to point to Colombia because they say they're capitalist. And by the way, real quick side note, when Venezuela was capitalist in the 80s, and my uncle lived there. Him and my dad left the Middle East about the same time. And he ended up in Venezuela pretty much the rest of his life. My dad went to Brazil and then came to America. But he would tell my dad on the phone all the time, like it was a 50% poverty rate. He had a couple of dime stores that did okay, and he ended up with an okay life. But a lot of people didn't have that kind of luxury. And especially in the 80s and 90s, when people were starving in the street, you think living under bridges in America here is tough. So those people look pretty well fed, and I'm not seeing any dead starving bodies unless they move them really quick. But in Venezuela, it was like a 50% poverty rate. By the time Hugo Chavez was in there 10 years, the poverty rate had dropped down to 15%, 15%. Why is that? Maybe because people were making more money and had affordable housing and had healthcare, and they weren't going into debt being sick like we do here. But if you want to point to a capitalist country that doesn't work, aside from us, because we're Brazil in 3 years. Count on it. Colombia is right next door. And they say they're capitalist, and they're our allies. In fact, they're an associate member of NATO, which, if you know your geography, is bizarre because Colombia is in South America and NATO is in Europe. So I don't know why Colombia is an associate member of NATO. I have a pretty goddamn good idea, because we could put an army there and invade Venezuela if we want to. But I digress again. So Colombia has a 40% poverty rate. They murder campesinos by the thousands. They murder journalists. They imprison labor union leaders. They imprison journalists. They rig elections all the time. And we don't care, because we get their coffee and bananas and cocaine for near free. And we pay their dickhead president guy the same thing we did with, Gusto Pinochet back in the 70s and 80s in Chile. Here's $500,000 a year. Just make sure we get our copper for free and don't fuck up. And that's it. So you want to point to socialist countries that do work, and that they're not even like pure socialists, but they're socialist enough. I mean, there's still like a consumer issue to it, which, it's always to expand and buy more. But you look at the Nordic countries, you look at the EU, most of whom work. And oh, by the way, everybody in the developed world has a basic income. And during the pandemic, everyone on top of the basic income, or on top of the countries that do have a basic income, some don't, but everyone had their paychecks covered in the developed countries. Everybody. Britain, France, Italy, Sweden, Norway, Japan, everybody has covered paychecks. No less than 80% of their paycheck has been covered. So they could stay home. Here, we're like, fuck you, stay home, quit you're fired, quit your job, business got to close, sorry. If it's a restaurant or a mechanic shop or something, you got to close up, you got to social distance. All these impositions that we put on them that get in the way of them doing business efficiently, and we're not paying them any money at all whatsoever. But to give, and by the way, if you didn't notice, the Senate rushed back from break to vote on that defense bill. They voted on that shit real quick. But the $600, they had to wait on that. They weren't sure. We're gonna means test that. We're gonna see if there's a pay-go exemption we can get for that. And I'm almost done. Wow, pretty quick today. I just wanted to get that off my chest because we're due. We are due. We are shareholders in this country, and even a PIN, which is what a lot of undocumented workers have to legally work here. See, there's ways to get around this shit. They don't tell you on TV. If they're paying taxes, they should get a dividend. Sorry, and we can afford it. And the companies I'm talking about, Amazon, Google, IBM, all of them, they can afford it. And we start really taxing them. We haven't done that in years and years and years and years. We used to have a middle class in this country when we tax these people. And I'm not talking about taking all their shit and buying me a summer home. I'm saying that, the 8 to 10% of your gross that you pay in taxes makes a shit ton of difference. And, the couple of percentage points that my taxes go up to make sure that we got free college, which we used to have. Okay, I'm 57 years old. I'm really sick and tired of people acting like I want a pony. We had free college in this country. It was subsidized by the state or the feds. And I say this example all the time if you listen to this show regularly. Where I went to school, Cal Poly Pomona in California, pretty well-known college. Back in the 80s, when I got out of school, I was paying $100 a quarter, all you can eat units. My junior college, which I spent 3 years at, was absolutely free. I paid $15 a semester, $15. $5 for the semester, $5 for parking, and $5 for the clinic, because they wanted to make sure that every kid had a shot at the clinic. That sounds like socialized medicine to me. Well, because college kids, they fuck a lot and they get the clap. So you got to give them a shot. That's what the clinic was for. But that was that. Right now, community college is about $200 a unit. You're taking out loans to go to community college. And then my old school, a good buddy of mine, his son graduated there from Cal Poly last year. And him and his wife were paying $6,500 a quarter for that. Why? When every developed country in the world has that at no charge. And that's more money into the economy. So when people act like you want something for nothing, no, you want to jumpstart the economy, That's what you do. You put money in people's hands. Then they buy cars, they buy homes. Maybe they'll buy a second home. And that all rolls up to the capitalists. That all rolls up to the people who really control production in this country. Because one thing you got to understand, if you're making $1 million a year, that's cool, but you're about $960,000 close to being homeless and $999 million away from being a billionaire. So you're actually closer to my class than you are to the Jeff Bezos class. So quit acting like you're temporarily embarrassed billionaire. And if that term means something to you and you really don't care about your fellow man, well, then fuck off, because honestly, you're kind of a dick. And I see that on both sides of the aisle, whether it's the crunchy reds or the chewy blues, that whole attitude of I got mine. It doesn't matter it doesn't matter what happens. Oh, Biden, I had one friend of mine on this text thread that I'm on saying, that tomorrow he's going to go to this bar that we all kind of hang out once in a while. These days it's once in a while. And he's going to cry in his beer for his country because he's so glad Biden's coming in. Guy's a fucking child, okay? I mean, he's my age. He's not like some freshman at UT. You're 12 years old. I get it. But when you're a 50-some-odd-year-old man and you didn't start paying attention to this shit until 2016, and now you honestly think that things are going to be that different, Biden just fucked people in Georgia by saying, no, vote Democrat and we'll get you those $2,000 checks. Well, it turns out those $2,000 checks are going to be the $1,400 checks on top of the $600 that they just sent out to some people. So it's not a $2,000 check. It's going to be $1,400 on top of the $600. Right. And then Biden, was promising to knock off 50 grand of people with student loans if their income was under 100 grand a year. And he said, well, no. We're going to knock it. We're only going to knock 10 grand off. And now it's like, we're not going to knock anything off. We're just going to forgive your payments for 6 months. I mean, just fucking bullshit, man. It's, again, the capitalists own the means of production. You and me are worker bees. I don't care if you're a millionaire. If you don't own the means of production, and by that, I don't mean you have a business that manufactures a widget or two and you sell it into the marketplace. I got clients like that up the ass. Great people, nice people. But they are not owners of the means of production. When I say owners of the means of production, I'm talking about oil, I'm talking about pharma, I'm talking about insurance, I'm talking about the defense industry, I'm talking about the internet, right? All the ISPs, right? The Verizons, the cell phone companies. Those guys are the owners of the means of production. Jeff Bezos and Amazon collect 60 cents on every dollar made on the internet. That is a staggering amount of business. And I don't begrudge him, right? Of course, I wouldn't begrudge him if he paid his taxes, didn't fuck over his workers, didn't have 20,000 people working in his facilities that got COVID and, didn't do shit about it and didn't close and didn't do anything. He had to be exposed, or Amazon had to be exposed. But the fish rots at the head. It all comes from the top. And when you privatize everything and make everything a commodity, then you've made human life worthless. We don't value human life. It's like, fuck it if you die. I mean, if you remember the beginning of this COVID thing, man, it was more Republicans saying this than the Democrats, but I've heard people on the left say this shit too. Well, hey, if it's your grandma, fuck it. Well, you know what? In the last couple of weeks, some folks from where I went to high school passed away. They weren't my grandma. They're, like 50, 45, 53. It's sad. It's sad. But we have this baked in the brain disease, that just basically says we value money over human life. Look at the Black Lives Matter thing, right? And I'll start wrapping up here in a second. Look at the Black Lives Matter protests this summer. Everyone's clutching their pearls and freaking out over property. Oh my God, they're vandalizing things. And if you really paid attention, it was the fucking cops starting that shit. And a lot of them were actually setting those fires, but that's a whole nother show. But meanwhile, back at the Capitol, Blue Lives Matter didn't mean shit, because I didn't see a single right-winger online or anybody that I knew personally say a single fucking thing when that cop got beat to death with a fire extinguisher, right? Or that one black cop got chased up the stairs by a bunch of goddamn Trump supporters, right? White people doing the Capitol, Blue Lives don't matter for shit. Lady gets shot in the neck, I didn't see anybody freaking out about that, right? I didn't see any, police brutality, violence, people. It runs both ways. She got shot in the neck. Was it too far? I don't know what the fuck he was thinking. He was probably scared shitless because there are 10,000 people and there's only 500 cops. No National Guard, no DC police. The whole thing is a fucking setup. But that's another deal too. But I say all that to say that we don't place value on the right things. Our priorities are so fucking far out of whack that people look at us like we're insane. I remember a couple of summers ago, I was here in Austin, and this is anecdotal because I can't speak for the entire country of England or the UK, but we were watching a UT game at this bar we go to on 6th Street here in town, and met this older British couple. They were there with their kid. They came to visit their son, and he was touring them around. And hey, let's drop into this bar. It's kind of a well-known bar, and we start chit-chatting. And if you know British politics, there are Tories and there are Labour, and Labour is the, quote, Liberal Party, and the Tories are, quote, the Conservative Party, the Boris Johnson wing of people. And by the way, Boris Johnson, who's the British Donald Trump, is paying a UBI, and they've never not had health care since we gave it to him in the 50s. So, yeah. Anyway, this Brit, we didn't agree on anything. Nice, lively conversation, because he was like an older guy, and he lived through the 60s, and he had a badass time, and, was telling me all these stories about the animals and shit. So we kind of, we bonded over that. But then the one point he made to me, even though we didn't agree on anything, was he said, you know what it is with you Yanks? I don't understand. You don't have health care. My son has to pay insurance out of his paycheck. And then you went to go use it, and there's some things that they didn't cover. It's ridiculous. I'm like, yeah, it's ridiculous. And then this was his question, the conservative, the right-winger, the pro-war fucking pro-banking right-winger. He said, well, then why do you pay taxes here? I was like, well, that's a goddamn good question. Because when you add up all the math and all the numbers, right? Free college. I got, like I said, my brother, he has a daughter back east, and that ain't $6,500 a quarter. They're paying a lot more than that. And my friend and his wife I was just telling you about, that's like $20,000 a year tuition, not books, not living expenses, just tuition. That goes back into the household. Period. That money goes back in the household. Somebody paying daycare, $15,000-$20,000 a year for daycare. We should pick that up. Why wouldn't we pick that up? That's money back into the household. And as I finally wrap up here, I'll leave you with this example. I know I'm a man of a certain age, not proud of it, but I went to business school. That's where I got my degree. And that's how I got my degree. And part of it was because I was playing in a band, and business seemed the easiest major to do, and and go to band practice 3 or 4 nights a week, which is what we were doing. So that's why I did it. But now I don't regret it, because there's a lot of shit that I learned at that time that I think people of a certain age don't get anymore. And one good example, and I'll be very quick about this, is the Pullman strikes. And those of you who know who Eugene Debs is, that's how he kind of came to national attention in the 1890s, was because there was this town called Pullman in Pullman, Illinois. A guy named George Pullman owned the town because he made this really badass, like the Wild Wild West, that big train car that just kind of hooked up to the back of a train. Rich guys would like just hook up to the back of a train and pay the Union Pacific or whoever to tow them around. And it was this gigantic car with silk walls and a bar and their own kitchen and all this crazy shit. And it was called the Pullman travel car. And so the entire town of Pullman was about roughly 100,000 people. And Pullman, you had to live in Pullman to work at Pullman, right? So he owned all the property, didn't sell any houses, rented them, owned several of the all of the general stores. I think there was like 5 or 6 general stores there. And this is before the automobile system, no gas stations or anything, just, the general store and lumber yards and stuff like that. Well, long story short, he decided to lower the workers' wages and then raise their rents and raise the prices at the general store. This began what they called the Pullman strikes, right? And Eugene Debs ended up leading a nationwide strike of about 500,000 Americans, and they put him in jail for it, because that's what we do in this country. And then he ran for president twice, one time from jail because Woodrow Wilson put him in jail for trying to run for president in 1916. And for the crime of running for president, Woodrow Wilson put him and a bunch of other guys in jail. And then Warren G. Harding pardoned him in 1921. But all that to say, in the beginning with the Pullman strikes, the initial issue was, you can't do that. You can't lower wages and then raise prices and expect workers to buy your shit, right? But we do that in this country. And that's a lesson that we don't seem to learn. And then people saying things like, well, if you should work at McDonald's, you're not supposed to be there forever. Well, fuck you. They're making your food. I don't care if they're restaurant, McDonald's, whatever. It's like, why we have this disdain for, fast food workers or, people that work at the grocery store or whatever. Dude, they're doing their thing for you. They should be paid for it. And there's plenty of profit to go around. And this is the last point, and I'll just start, closing up the shop here. One of the things that we could do, and by the way, I said this to Neil Dykman about 2 years ago when he was running for Senate. And the libertarian actually thought this was a good idea. So I know I'm onto something. Why not take $300 billion out of defense, put it into the Department of Labor, and then businesses that are, say, like a bar or a restaurant or like a dry cleaners, they can't afford to, say, pay $25 an hour. Well, that's cool. Have them get a subsidy from the Department of Labor, kind of like we'd give with Chase in the defense industry, free money, right? Or it could be a gigantic tax credit, right? So they're paying less in taxes because they are paying $25 an hour, okay? And that way everyone's happy, right? Problem solved. Instead of saying we can't do this, which basically shuts off all of your options, right? If somebody says, hey, you want to go to this thing tonight? Nah, I can't go. Done. No more discussion. I can't go. But if I'm like, hey, well, hang on. Let me see if I can't move a couple things around. Now I'm thinking about how to go. Now I'm thinking about how to do it. Now I'm thinking about, well, shoot, do I have to do this tonight? Can I wait till tomorrow or even next week? This other thing sounds actually kind of fun. Instead of saying, no, I can't go. Once you say, no, I can't, it's over. There's no more discussion. And you know what I'm talking about. Everyone listening to this right now knows what I'm talking about. That being said, guys, that's my big point. We need a basic income. It has to be a dividend paid by industry with whom we've invested our taxpayer dollars. These are our dollars. I know I'm emphasizing kind of dramatically weird to make a point, but I don't give a shit. So there you go. But that's it. Listen, guys, again, thebittertruth.info. Appreciate the support. We don't take advertising and that kind of thing. I'm not big enough to, get YouTube to bug you guys with ads or anything like that. But I've been offered a few strange ideas, and they weren't good. And so I would rather just keep slinging it out. But everything's available to listen to for free. Obviously, the more important thing is to get the information out there. So when you hear the interviews or just me ranting for the half hour that I do sometimes, it's I try to get the smarty pants people to come on and talk about the smarty pants things, so that we can all kind of grow and learn and kind of evolve. And as Bill Hicks said, get the fuck off this planet. Bittertruth.info. And as always, you guys, if this stuff makes you uncomfortable, it's supposed to. Sleep tight.